Good Shabbos. Have you heard the term flurona? That's the new one. What is that? That is flu and corona together. And that's what's being reported on now as something that's somewhat of a reality. One thing that this whole era of post-COVID has shown us is that there's no certainty. There's no clarity, no certainty. Plans change. You have to change your plans on the fly, and you cannot be rigid. If one is rigid in their ways, they will be left behind. One has to constantly reevaluate and be able to be nimble on their feet and be able to do what the times necessitate for them to do. And you cannot get too disappointed when plans that you might have been making for a long time have to be delayed or set aside or even canceled. This week is the yahrzeit, the day of passing of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. And subsequently, it's also the day that the Rebbe became the Rebbe of Chabad thereafter. So the previous Rebbe was leader of the Chabad movement for 30 years, passing away, as I said, on the 10th of Shvat, 72 years ago, 1950. Now, his leadership was remarkable in numerous ways, but in one particular area where he was very much unique to his predecessors. You see, first and foremost, the Rebbe, the leader of Chabad, his mission was to teach Hasidic philosophy as understood in the Chabad tradition, starting from the Alter Rebbe, the ideas of the Tanya, and for later discourses that all the Rebbes of Chabad had revealed, with a motto of what the Baal Shem Tov was told by the soul of Mashiach, that when his teachings spread forth throughout the world, that's when Mashiach will come. The teachings of Hasidus were suitable, of course, to all scholars, and all Jews are able to study this new perspective, this new light, gave new light and new life into Judaism. And that was the focus of Chabad Rebbes. However, as the previous Rebbe became Rebbe in Soviet Russia in 1920, a new reality arose. The reality that the Soviets closed schools, sealed mikvahs, imprisoned rabbis, and there was an absolute danger to basic Judaism. The previous Rebbe then took on the role of not just being a Rebbe who taught Chassidus, which he did, but in addition to that, to save Judaism in the Soviet Union. For that, he sent emissaries all over Russia to teach children. He sent money to rabbis who otherwise would have not been able to serve as rabbis. He sent people to places to do a bris or to make a underground mikveh. He made underground cheder classes throughout the Soviet Union, simply to save Yiddishkeit. But that was very, very dangerous work. And of course, in 1927, he was in prison. He had a death sentence on his head and miraculously was released. Released and then kicked out of Russia. He, at that time, took a trip, more or less around then, took a trip to Israel for a few weeks, to America for 9 months, ultimately decided to settle down back in Europe. He was in Riga for a while and ultimately settled in 1939 in Warsaw. Sorry, in 1930 in Warsaw. And there, he had a new task. Most Jews in Warsaw was a great big city of many Jews, many religious Jews, scholars, rebbes. And here he, with coming with nothing, had to establish himself in a new place and break through the suspicion of others, like, who's this newcomer? And what's he have to teach? What's he have to say? We're good, we're fine as we are. But he knew that these teachings are very necessary for this well-being of Jews, their Jewish well-being, that is, their commitment to Torah, their inspiration, their deep connection. And so there too, he had to once again set up a yeshiva, set up a Hasidic court, if you'd like, which he did until 1939, when the Nazis marched into Poland. And one way or another, miraculously, the Rebbe was plucked out of that hell of Poland and was able to arrive in America in March 1940. At which point, all the people that he met when he was there 10 years ago came to see him at the port, thousands of people. And he announced that we're going to make a yeshiva here, just like we had in Europe. And a few days later, he had a meeting with supporters and helpers to see how they can make this happen and make it practical. After the meeting, two of his greatest supporters came into his room and says, Rebbe, we want to avoid embarrassment, that you should not be embarrassed, and Chabad's name should not be put down. America is not the old country. It's not going to fly here. You're not going to be able to make a yeshiva here like in Europe. America is Amdish. America is different. The previous Rebbe writes in his diaries that night when he said the Shema and thought about the happenings of the day, which is what we meant to do when we say the Shema every night, he cried. He cried that here his biggest supporters weren't behind him, were afraid, thought it would never work. So he announced thereafter, America is nicht anders. America is no different. And just like we were able to do there, we'll be able to achieve here. Most of the Jewish community then, the Frum Jewish community, the Rebbes and others lived in at the Lower East Side. But the Rebbe came to a place called Crown Heights, which was a wealthy Jewish neighborhood at the time, had the largest conservative synagogue in America then, Brooklyn Jewish Center, which ultimately is where my school was. And there he established Chabad movement. From there, he established Chabad movement. The month he came, there was a law passed in New York that children in public schools are able to go out on a Wednesday for 1 hour to study their religion. And with that, the Rebbe utilized that opportunity to send teachers to all the public schools in New York, wherever there were Jewish children, to teach them an hour a week called Release Time, Jewish topics and subject matter. So the previous Rebbe was someone who was nimble on his feet. Regardless of the circumstance and situation, he was able to change himself or change his focus and his goals to suit the times. The reason was because his Judaism wasn't just a mission of seeing things the way he wants to bring it forward, but rather to be there regardless of the situation, to be a soldier in God's army. And whatever the situation, whatever the circumstance, we are Jews, we have a mission, and that mission is able to be fulfilled. Remarkably, everyone else, every other Jewish leader, really throughout history, was the right leader in a particular time, particular situation, and they were suitable for that circumstance and that challenge of the time. When circumstances change, usually you needed another leader. The previous Rebbe, however, was able to be that leader in very different circumstances because he was totally and completely committed, not only to something he wanted to achieve, but he was committed to being God's messenger on earth. Jewish people going out of Egypt also had a similar situation. First, we come to Egypt, and they settle very nicely in Egypt, become like real estate agents and or developers in Goshen. Torah tells us that clearly. Then they go into the desert, and there they have to sit back and rely on Hashem to feed them and take care of them. And then they go into Israel and they have to become farmers. So we see how being a Jew means, and has always meant really, being able to be nimble and deal with a situation that comes your way, and not be locked into a particular perspective and the way I see it and has to be. So on this Yud Shvat, when we commemorate this holy man, the previous Rebbe, and also when we can reconnect to our Rebbe, who took his vision and spread it to an incredibly great way. This is a time for us, especially in this age of uncertainty and change and flux, to always have a very strong center. And the strong center is, we're Jewish, we have a mission from Hashem, and that mission is relevant at all times. And we have to be able to be flexible and understand how we can fulfill those missions at every situation and every time. Something for us to think about. And if don't feel strong enough, we don't feel that we have a strong enough center, we have to learn more. And when you learn Chassidics, it gives you that core center that allows you to be as committed regardless of what life sends your way, regardless of the challenges or the heartaches or the hardships, because your connection to Hashem never wanes and never changes. We have the ability to deal with all circumstances when we are very strong within. And that's what we have to try to strengthen. That's what the day of Yud Shvat allows us to strengthen, by recommitting our connection to the Rebbe's mission and teachings and guidance. It helps us be able to be those strong Jews, able to be there for ourselves and for others and our families, whatever the vicissitudes of life send our way. Good Shabbos.